Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're unpacking a genuinely radical thought experiment drawn directly from some incredibly fascinating source material. We're going to fast forward through the next few centuries and take a detailed theoretical look at the year 2425. We're talking about a complete reimagining of humanity, a future where the absolute foundational pillars of our society are totally transformed. It's a deep, challenging, and just a brilliantly thought-provoking look at the potential ethical evolution of our species. I want you to start by genuinely imagining this for just a second. What if you never had to pay for anything ever again? Seriously, no rent, no mortgage, no swiping a credit card at the pump, no stressing out over utility bills at the end of the month. Imagine a world completely and entirely free of financial transactions. Now, I know it sounds impossible, right? Like pure science fiction. But the source material we're looking at today argues that this isn't just a fantasy, it's actually the logical conclusion of our ethical evolution. Okay, let's dive into this. The author paints a super vivid picture of everyday life in 2025. Picture your own neighborhood grocery store. You walk in, you take exactly what your family needs for the week, and you just leave. There are literally no cashiers, no frustrating self-checkout lanes, no receipts. And the shelves? Well, they're restocked by people who do the work not because they desperately need a paycheck to survive, but as their direct chosen contribution to society. The source describes a society built on what they call ethical abundance. Instead of our current system, which is driven by scarcity, where we hoard resources just to feel secure, this future operates completely on the principle of contribution. People produce as much as they possibly can, and they consume only what they genuinely need. Section 1. 3 obsolete pillars. Let's look at how money, government, and religion simply fade away. Now, the text makes a really important distinction here. We aren't going to violently dismantle our institutions. We're just going to outgrow them. So a natural question is, how on earth do we actually get things done without money? The author explains that the actual logistics of civilization totally survive the end of money. Right now, our current logistics allocate resources based on purchasing power, right? If you have the wealth, you get the goods. But in the future, this gets replaced by requests and contribution records, driven entirely by human need and a deep ethical sense of duty. Think about how Wikipedia operates today. It's an amazing analogy. It coordinates the massive contributions of millions of volunteers to create this incredibly reliable resource without a single financial transaction. The text suggests we can use algorithms, AI, and that shared ethical duty to forecast demand and manage global supply chains in exactly the same way, just completely removing the layer of monetary distortion. So, what about governments? Well, currently, governance is built on central authority, coercion, borders, and essentially a monopoly on force. But in an uncorrupted society, where people aren't constantly seeking to exploit each other, the fundamental need for law enforcement kind of just evaporates. The source envisions a completely stateless world. Essential services, building roads, providing healthcare, all that, would be managed by voluntary, functional collectives. These local administrative hubs would coordinate logistics and shared goals, for sure, but they would be stripped entirely of coercive power, taxation, or hierarchy. I love this part. The CEO and the janitor are viewed with exact equal dignity, because both are simply fulfilling their ethical duties toward humanity. The third pillar to fall is religion. For millennia, religion has used the promise of divine reward or the threat of eternal punishment to essentially enforce moral conduct. But the author outlines a transition to a fundamentally atheist world where ethical living is pursued simply because it's intrinsically rewarding. When a society actually understands the psychological mechanisms behind harmful behavior, people won't need the idea of divine surveillance to motivate them to be good. So what happens to all those beautiful religious buildings? Well, the text notes they definitely won't be destroyed. Instead, temples, cathedrals, and mosques will become museums of the psyche, basically historical time capsules and sanctuaries where we can go to reflect on the fascinating psychological evolution of our species. Section 2. Is it just utopia? Confronting the human nature argument. Now, what's really interesting about this quote is how perfectly it hits the nail on the head. If you're sitting there feeling a bit skeptical, trust me, you are not alone. It is so natural to think that humans are just inherently greedy. But the author points out that this greed is actually a learned cultural habit, perfectly captured by this famous Bruno Mars lyric. It resonates with us because we currently live in a system that absolutely glorifies accumulation. The author points out that our current cultural fantasy isn't to create or to contribute. It's to consume endlessly without consequence. We are quite literally born into a paradigm that equates success with hoarding wealth. So yeah, of course a future society based on contribution feels completely unbelievable to a mind raised in our current economic system. To actually make this future function, the author argues we need a fundamental shift within the individual. The text reclaims and strictly redefines a historically loaded term, Aryan, using it purely within a philosophical and ethical framework. Within the specific context of this source material, it's defined as individuals who deeply know themselves and understand that the true essence of human life is to contribute to humanity. And the author makes a really absolutely crucial point here. We cannot just abolish money today. This moneyless society absolutely will not work unless a massive, massive threshold is met. Specifically, the author notes that roughly 95% of the population must reach the specific ethical baseline of moral intelligence for the whole shebang to actually function. But you're probably asking, what about the remaining 5%? What about the free riders who try to stockpile goods or take advantage of the system? Well, the text uses a brilliant ecosystem analogy. Think about it. A healthy ecosystem doesn't just collapse or wildly overreact when a small imbalance appears. In this highly ethical society, minorities who act selfishly aren't met with prisons, force, or fear. Instead, they're met with education, incredible patience, and community support. Because the vast majority understands that abundance is maintained by everyone's active contribution, those small disruptions are easily absorbed and organically corrected through compassion. Section 3. The transitional stage. The final form of ethical capitalism. Obviously, we can't just flip a switch, we need a practical roadmap to get there. So the crucial point is how the actual nature of money gradually changes before it disappears completely. In this transitional stage, people definitely still receive salaries, but they use nearly all their extra income to contribute to humanity, not to just buy more luxury goods. There's no stockpiling of wealth, no massive inheritances passed down to give some children an unfair, unearned advantage. Instead, extra funds are pooled into a global banking system that super efficiently allocates resources based entirely on collective need. Money basically loses its status as a symbol of power and quietly becomes just a redundant administrative mechanism, a simple coordinating tool that we are quickly outgrowing. Let's move on and see how this builds logically, step by step. The author outlines a 4-step logistical process for this massive societal shift. Step 1 is spreading awareness, using books, media, and explainers just like this one to share the perspective. Step 2 is transforming individuals, really relying on the influence of early adopters to inspire others, completely without force. Step 3 introduces schools for the best self. I love this idea. The curriculum shifts away from brutally competing for grades to actually cultivating ethical insight and self-mastery. And finally, step 4 is public dialogue, creating open spaces for philosophers, scientists, and everyday people to collaboratively map out the actual ethical architecture of our new society. Section 4, Humanity's Next Evolution, Graduating Beyond the Myths. And this brilliantly illustrates how this whole evolution ties together. The text connects our future back to the historical frameworks that literally built the modern world. Notice how Yuval Noah Harari's concept of the 3 great unifying myths, the ones that allowed early humans to cooperate on a global scale, money, empires, and universal religions, are mapped out here. The text acknowledges we really should be thankful for these. They were necessary fictions that served as the scaffolding of human civilization. But, scaffolding is meant to come down once the building is actually finished. In the future, money is replaced by the ethic of contribution. Empires, which historically enforced peace through dominance, are replaced by mutual understanding. And universal religions are replaced by a humanist perspective rooted in direct experience and observation. We basically outgrow the myths and graduate into a truly conscious species. The author leaves us with a really powerful reminder. Societal change doesn't require billions of people to convert all at once. It honestly starts with just a few individuals choosing vision over cynicism. We are the early adopters, and we have the incredible privilege of planting that seed today. Which leaves us with this final, remarkably provocative challenge drawn straight from the text. What kind of world do we truly want to build? I want you to really think about that today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.